All right. Hi, everybody. Really appreciate you joining us for this month's NAA webinar. We've got a really cool guest today, like we usually do, and really excited to have Kip Tyler here with us. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. For right now, everyone's going to be on mute with no video. The chat box is open anytime, so drop questions into there as Kip goes through his presentation, and then once he wraps up, we're going to have an open Q&A session, so you can use the raise your hand feature and I'll unmute you if you want to speak, or feel free to just type in the chat box and I can read off questions, and we'll go along like that. Before I introduce Kip, I want to say thanks to Gulfstream Aquaculture and Dennis Peters for sponsoring our webinar today. Gulfstream Aquaculture, they focus on marine finfish research and development, offshore, coastal, and land-based farm siting analysis, and commercial feasibility assessments as well. So feel free to reach out to Dennis anytime. And again, thanks a lot for supporting what we're doing here today. So I want to introduce Kip Tyler. Kip has served with the Environmental Protection Agency's Region 4 office in Atlanta for 15 years. He's in the NPDES permitting and enforcement programs. Kip has been involved with regional and national permitting initiatives for freshwater and marine aquaculture. He is regularly works with other federal partners such as NOAA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Kip has extensive experience complying with environmental laws when issuing Clean Water Act permits, and his education does specifically include aquaculture from Virginia Tech and Washington State University. So Kip, I want to really say thanks for being here today. EPA's NPDES permitting program is very large and comprehensive. I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit before you kick off. Aquaculture is a very small component of what EPA does for the NPDES program. And we're just really appreciative of EPA and your time commitment to come here and speak with us today. We know you are a very busy agency, and it's great to have you. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Kip. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Charlie. Just want to make sure you can see my video and hear me.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to be here with y'all today. It's really a pleasure that I'm able to do this and do some education on both aquaculture and the NPDES program. It's a program that I love, been involved with for many years now. And so, yeah, you asked to briefly discuss, the NPDES program at large. And yeah, we are a huge program. We're dealing with the industry and municipal sectors. I will say just from off the top, it is primarily run by our state agencies. We have delegated the NPDES program to most states, but not all. So the state programs are primarily responsible for doing the NPDES permits around the nation. But we're going to talk about federal waters today, and we'll talk a little bit about state involvement versus federal involvement. Charlie, I just want to make sure you can see my overview screen of my presentation. Is that?
Yep, looks perfect.
Awesome. All right. So, a part of this is about what's in an NPDES permit. But, what I have seen as I've talked to people over the years is that there is a lack of understanding about why things are in NPDES permits. And so I do want to spend a little bit of time just explaining the why, and then we can get into what a typical NPDES permit in federal waters might have. So with this screen, I want to say that there's two different permitting agencies. It's the Army Corps of Engineers under their Section 10 permitting authorization. They're authorizing the structures in and over navigable waters and anchorages to the seafloors. That's not the NPDES program. So the NPDES program by EPA is, it looks like I'm losing some resources here, so I'm going to shut off my video. I'll come back on at the end, so give me just a second. Sorry about that. So the NPDES program is required when we meet four criteria. There's those four are: number one, it has to be a point source. Number two, there has to be a discharge. There has to be a pollutant, which is number three, and then all of those have to occur in a waters of the U.S. And so I don't want anybody to judge my simple picture here, but what I'm trying to do is describe what are all of the what we call pollutants. And pollutants is a broad term and has been defined many times by the courts over the years. And so it includes the feed and feces that we all know are coming from these farms, but it includes a few things that we typically don't think of. Um, One of those is any drugs that are being discharged from the facility, but it also includes biological materials such as the pathogens or diseases that are escaping or getting out of the cages, and as well as the fish themselves. The fish themselves can be quote unquote a pollutant that meets the term of a biological material. And then last thing I want to say on this slide is I want to talk about a common misunderstanding and where the state waters are and where federal waters are. So state waters are for Clean Water Act NPDES purposes, state waters are from 0 to 3 miles. And then from 3 miles out to 200 nautical miles is what EPA considers to be federal waters. So in the Gulf of Mexico, there is 2 states, Florida and Tennessee, that have been granted Submerged Lands Act authority out to 9 nautical miles. But that does not impact EPA's NPDES program. Our program is a uniform 3 miles. So the Submerged Land Act authority to 9 miles for Florida and Texas is not impacted. So state waters 0 to 3, federal waters for EPA purposes is beyond 3 miles. So where do the NPDES permit conditions come from? They come from a lot of places. The first is we have this regulation called the effluent limit guidelines for the concentrated aquatic animal production facilities. That is an acronym. It's CAP for short. And if a facility is discharging above certain thresholds, both production in terms of fish and feed rates, then the CAP effluent limit guidelines will apply to that facility. The second place where NPDES conditions will come from in the ocean environment in federal waters, not in state waters, is Clean Water Act Section 403, and we call that the ocean discharge criteria. And that evaluation has to be done by EPA to determine if there is any quote unquote unreasonable degradation. So that's where we are determining if there's any significant adverse change to the ecosystem diversity, the productivity, and the stability of that community. And we do that by doing a ocean discharge criteria evaluation. And I won't go into every detail, but there's 10 criteria within that ocean discharge evaluation that we have to consider when making that determination of whether there will be unreasonable degradation of the ocean environment or not. The next one is best professional judgment. The Clean Water Act gives the permit writer, the permit authority, a broad authority, I should say, to put conditions in a permit as they see fit, and sometimes that is at the best professional judgment of the permit writer. Modeling is also another place where we will get conditions from. So that's not only the water quality modeling, but that's the depositional modeling. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And finally, I think many of you may know that when we issue an NPDES permit in federal waters, it's complicated. There are lots of other laws that we must comply with, and I have some of those listed here. And those laws, in doing the evaluation or the consultation with other federal agencies, they may end up requiring certain things with an NPDES permit. So here's kind of where I want to switch over into what's within a permit rather than the why certain things are in the permit. So the first thing I have on the screen here is reporting. So an NPDES permittee will be required to report their drug usage, their any extra label or investigational new animal drug is required to be reported. Any structural failure or damage has a 24-hour reporting requirement within the permit. And also for any spills of drugs, feeds, pesticides, and other chemicals, they have to report those kind of spills, again, within a certain time frame. The best management practices is really the big thing here. And it is required by the NPDES program. It's required by the CAP regulations that the permittee develop a project-specific best management practices plan because the permittee is the one that knows the facility the best. And that best management practices plan has to meet these 8 requirements that are listed. The biggest one there, the primary one, is obviously the feed management because that is what is it's giving the most pollutants to the environment. So I'm not going to go into all 8 there, but the best management practices plan is a significant requirement that must be met and it would be within all of the NPDES permits. So here's some examples of what an outfall might look like for a finfish operation in federal waters. These are the discharge limits, and I want to be clear, and or the monitoring. So this could be limits and or monitoring. There's a big difference between effluent limits and effluent monitoring. Effluent monitoring is only sampling, where a limit is going to have an enforceable threshold with it. And so some of these are going to come from the CAP effluent limit guidelines. For example, the fish biomass, the feed rate, and the fish feed conversion ratio, and the medicinal products reporting. Those are going to come from the CAP guidelines. Others are going to come from those other places that I mentioned previously, like modeling. I'll note that there for copper, we would probably only see that if there was a cage made out of copper. So we would only be sampling the water column when the cage is made out of copper. Obviously, the other big one there is the nutrient related, which is nitrogen, total ammonium nitrogen, phosphorus, and chlorophyll A. Those are all the parameters that we associate with nutrients, or most of them. And then each one of these discharge limits or monitoring, they're going to have a monitoring frequency associated with them, and there's going to be a clear location. So there might be multiple locations around a cage, which is the outfall or the effluent that needs to be sampled. This is a continuation of what we would see within an NPDES permit for the monitoring requirements. We want to make sure that we are understanding the upcurrent or the upstream location as a background condition to make sure that we're capturing where the effects of the aquaculture operation are not happening. We also want to measure downstream or down current. And I've listed some of the parameters that we would likely be measuring or sampling for. The second there is seafloor monitoring. We need to understand how the deposition from the facility is being transported down to the seafloor, how that resuspension and how the assimilation is occurring on the seafloor. And we might have some monitoring and sampling for the items listed there. And just again, some of these monitoring requirements will have the frequency and the location, and there may be multiple or many locations. Lastly, there's going to be some other plans or other certifications that are within the permit. So the first one here is the facilities damage prevention and control plan. That is required, like for the facility to determine when there is an emergency situation, such as a hurricane, um, that they have an appropriate plan to deal with that. So that there is no, for example, any fish escapes. We'll have a quality assurance project plan. That is to ensure that all of the NPDES sampling and monitoring is done in accordance with all the laws and the regulations. And then there'll be some annual certifications of the BMP plan, of the facility damage prevention and control plan, and all of the trainings that are required, or the facility says that are required. So there's usually lots of annual certifications that have to occur. And then lastly, there's just the standard conditions that are all in all NPDES permits. So with that, I wanted to open up a question and answer. Hopefully we can have a good dialogue. And I'm looking forward to any questions or answers questions y'all have. I'm going to turn back on my video and take off my screen, and hopefully that will work.
All right. Thanks, Kip. So, folks, you can raise your hand if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question directly. Or again, type anything you'd like in the chat too. Go, Randy.
There, can you hear me okay, Kip?
Yeah, sure can.
Thank you very much. Great presentation. My name's Randy Lovell. I'm the state aquaculture coordinator in California. I heard a few years ago. So first off, I understand that there were some either biomass or feed loading limits below which NPDES permits were not required. And I'm really not talking about net pen operations, because these would be smaller operations on land typically. But those thresholds, I heard once removed, I heard that those exemptions were challenged in court. Do you know what the status is of those exemptions for concentrated animal limitations?
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. So did you say that there was a court case? Did I understand that question right? If you're talking.
Yes, I muted myself and couldn't unmute, but yeah.
Okay.
I believe so. I believe it was successfully challenged, but I don't know for certain.
Okay. I can't really talk about the court case. Honestly, I don't know much about the court case. I can tell you broadly, yes, there are thresholds for the concentrated aquatic animal production facilities. And so and as you probably know, there's the freshwater, and then there's a net pen category within our CAP regulations. And so for the net pen operations, generally speaking, if you are producing fish above 100,000 pounds per year, then the effluent limit guidelines will automatically apply to that facility. So if you're producing less than 100,000 pounds, that doesn't mean that you won't get the same effluent limit guideline conditions, which are the BMP based conditions. It just means that you're below those thresholds, and that an NPDES permit can still be required for an operations that's producing less than 100,000 pounds. And I'll give you a perfect example. The example is the Ocean Era facility that we've issued an NPDES permit for in the Gulf of Mexico. That permit is currently that facility is currently permitted to produce around 80-ish thousand pounds per year. So clearly falling underneath the 100,000 pound threshold, where where what we're saying is that it's not a concentrated aquatic animal production facility, but it still is required to get an NPDES permit. I
Got
hope
it.
that I've clarified it there. If you got any more questions, I can try to answer.
Thank you.
All right, the questions are rolling in. I'll try to make them in order here, folks. Randy, I just allowed you to unmute.
I think Randy is the one who just asked it. Is
Oh,
that right?
shoot. Kent, I'm sorry. I'm reading the wrong name.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, so my question is more related to process. I'm the president of Blue Silo Aquaculture, and we're pursuing an offshore aquaculture project co-located with an offshore platform. And that in and of itself is not maybe germane to the conversation, but I am aware. I've been following the Ocean Era project and the really several cycles of appeals that they've gone through, which is the nature of an individual NPDES permit, which makes it very time consuming and laborious to acquire one of those things. I'm also very familiar because I come out of the oil and gas industry with the general permit that the oil and gas industry operates in the Gulf of Mexico. And so I guess my question is,
It can't. We can't.
a general NPDES permit for offshore aquaculture.
Kent, I think we missed a good bit of that last part, your actual question. Would you mind repeating it?
Okay. Is there any movement or activity towards a general NPDES permit as opposed to the requirement for individual permits for offshore aquaculture?
Yeah. So to answer your question and to kind of feed into some of the background that you provided about the oil and gas industry, you're correct. The oil and gas industry does have a general permit. That general permit has been around on the order of 20 or plus years. That is a well-established industry in the Gulf of Mexico. For aquaculture, and specifically offshore aquaculture, we have not seen the need yet for a general permit. We've only have the Ocean Air facility and then one other application that is in process right now. So the only two total facilities. I think EPA could and would probably consider a general permit at the right time because that's not only efficient for us, it's efficient for the industry. But again, we haven't seen the need for that right now. I will also say that these first few projects, most likely or probably would be best covered under an individual permit until we have a better understanding of how aquaculture impacts are happening or if they're happening in the Gulf of Mexico. And I say Gulf of Mexico,
Okay,
my region, but Gulf of Mexico and and other federal waters of the nation.
okay. And maybe just follow up with how would one go about requesting a general permit? Is that done by the regulated community, or is that done internally by EPA?
So, I mean, I think the industry could voice their concerns. They could write to the EPA and let us know your opinions and feelings on us getting a general permit. But yeah, the decision to do that would be based on need, be based on lots of different factors, including the industry's position on that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to go through and read some of the written comments here, Kip. Besides Florida and Texas, which have the state water boundaries out to 9 nautical miles, what changes in the authority, if any, for states that already have GLDs for offshore wind areas?
Can you ask that? Can you read that one more time, or
Yeah.
I can look at it too?
So, but besides Florida and Texas, which go out to 9 miles, what changes in the authority, if anything, for states that already have GLDs for offshore wind areas?
Okay, if I understand the question, so in for aquaculture, I can't really speak to offshore wind. For a aquaculture permit that's issued in state waters, they simply don't have to do certain things. The things that are coming to mind is for the NPDES permit, they would not have to do a NEPA analysis. They also would not have to do an ESA Section 7 consultation with the Fish and Wildlife Service or NOAA. Again, that's for state issued permits in state waters only. So that would be some of the differences or the changes in authority. I hope that gets to your question, Rob.
Yeah, Rob, feel free to raise your hand or anything if we want to discuss it further. It didn't capture it. So moving down the line, if pathogens and escaped animals are considered pollutants, then why are shellfish and seaweed farms exempt from NPDES?
I think that question is from Mike. Thanks. I can't answer, exactly why. I mean, I can tell you that shellfish and or some shellfish and seaweed farms are exempt from NPDES because there are no addition of pollutants such as feed to those operations, to some shellfish operations. So that's the reason why they're exempt from NPDES. Not necessarily because they uh, aren't having pathogen influences on the water.
Right. And from Eric, how many finfish aquaculture NPDES permits have been issued and are still in operation in U.S. federal waters?
So a little bit of history. I'm just trying to think here. There was another finfish aquaculture operation that was permitted in the Gulf of Mexico, but never issued. Excuse me, never operated. So it had a permit, but they never built a facility, never discharged, never put any fish in the water. We have the Ocean Air Facility that has been permitted as well, but as of now, they have not put any cages or fish, and they're not having a discharge. And then there was another one, I believe it was called Snapper Farm. I may have butchered the name of it. That may not be it, but it was off the coast in federal waters of Puerto Rico. That was, I want to say, in the 90s. So as far as I know, there's only been 3 permitted finfish facilities in federal waters.
All right. Don, you're up next, sir.
Thank you, Charlie. Kip, Don Kent, Hub SeaWorld Research Institute. Right now, you guys are working on some modeling efforts to predict what effluent and depositional characteristics might result from different levels of farm in specific locations. And I know it's sort of a learn as you go situation for the agency because there's a lot of variables that go into these models and then a lot of experience that has to go in over time to understand what the actual impacts might be. Is there something that when we do start seeing some farms, the kind of information that the EPA might like to see from these farms that will allow them to validate these models and make them more effective such that the process of permitting farms might become a little easier, at least dealing with the effluent characteristics? You're muted, Kip.
Thank you. Hopefully I can answer your question. I think, right now, the EPA, and we're using our NOAA colleagues to help us out with modeling. So it's an EPA and NOAA joint effort in doing the modeling for certain facilities. I think in the future that might be turned over to the permittee at some point down the road after we have issued a number of these facilities. And again, we understand the impacts or lack of impacts on the ocean environment. So I think you're kind of getting at the, how can you speed up the process? And I think in the future, the applicant or the permittee might be able to provide that the modeling that we're looking for.
Assuming that the agency has a model system that they're comfortable with.
The agency does have a model system that we are currently comfortable with. That's not to say that that is the only modeling platform that has to be used. There are a number of platforms that are available and that can be used.
And I was just asking about effluent characteristics and depositional models. What about escapement models?
Yeah, that is something that that we are looking into. I believe there are a number of different technologies and models that exist, and we're trying to pick the best one that's going to be the most representative.
Thanks for putting this on today. Appreciate it.
All right, Paul, fire away.
Thank you, Charlie and Kip. This is Paul Zajac, National Aquaculture Association. Kip, thank you so much for doing this. I just want to kind of say that you're being very careful just to speak to EPA authorities.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier that in state waters that Section 7 consultation might not occur, right? But if the farm is going to have to get a Section 10 permit from U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and they would conduct that ESA Section 7 consultation. So I didn't want anybody to sort of feel like, here's a get out of free jail card. That's not the case.
That is correct, Paul.
And then for state waters, and I'd like you just to confirm this because this has been my belief just because it seemed true, that if an NPDES permit would be issued by a state for state waters, they can be more restrictive than the EPA program. Is that correct?
They can be, to answer your question simply.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it so much.
All right, moving on to one of the written questions. So for proposed land-based facilities with oceanic intake, as are common in other places in the world, what does NPDES permitting have to say about the diversion of water into said facilities?
The NPDES program does not deal with the diversion of water or the use of water to the facility. It only is about the discharge of pollutants from a point source into the waters of the U.S.
All right, another one from Mike. Just speaking about the cap thresholds, is the 100,000-pound exemption for all water temperatures? I recall a 20,000-pound limit in some situations.
Yeah, so I was referring to the net pin. I believe it's 100,000 pounds for net pins, and I believe it's 20,000 pounds for the cold water species. And I'm only speaking for the production amounts of fish. There are also some thresholds related to feed amounts and discharge frequency. So it gets a little bit more nuanced than that, but I just wanted to clarify that. If y'all have any questions regarding that, because I can't remember every single nuance right now, I'd love to have a follow-up conversation where we can dive into the details.
All right, the next one, it was speaking about there is an offshore finfish farm in Hawaii, blue ocean mariculture.
That is in state waters, not federal waters. So when I said that earlier, I was only speaking to the ones that I know of that are actually in federal waters.
Right. Another one from Mike. I'm wondering about if and how the benthic impacts would work over hard bottoms. I know that may have been an issue a few years ago.
Um, I guess I'm not really is the what's the question? Is it in the chat? Can I look at it or?
It is, yeah. If and how benthic impacts work over hard bottom.
Yeah, so we are concerned about the benthic impacts on the seafloor and hard bottoms. Hard bottoms without getting down there and videoing and confirming what kind of hard bottom it is. We are absolutely concerned, and we will protect those areas as needed. We'll do that primarily in our consultation with NOAA for our essential fish habitat consultation under the Magnuson-Stevenson's Act. They'll help us in understanding the hard bottoms, how far away we potentially need to be from any hard bottoms and the associated concentrations from the deposition that may impact those hard bottoms.
All right. Can you explain why an NPDES permit covers escapement?
I assume they're talking about escapement of fish. And again, that really gets back to the biological material definition of a pollutant. Again, pollutant is a very broad term that does have biological materials, and that can include pathogens and fish.
All right. This is had another follow-up from Randy. What internal direction, if any, has been given about the Supreme Court's recent Chevron decision? Are the guidances mentioned today subject to change as a result?
I have heard about that decision. I'm not an attorney, so I don't understand it, but there hasn't been any guidance yet that I know of that's been pushed to staff like myself that is going to be impactful. But again, I just don't know how that's going to play out.
All right. We ran out of questions for now, Kip. So, folks, we do still have time. So if anyone else wants to jump in, feel free to. Kip, I kind of had a little in the weeds question. For up current and down current monitoring, how is the distance determined for that? Is it case by case, or how does that sampling locations assessed? So.
Yeah, so I can speak to the ocean air permit. I think it's a good example of what our permits might look like. Primarily, we're going to ask the permittee to develop what we call an environmental monitoring plan that's going to take into account the project specifics, right? And so we as EPA only know so much through all of our efforts. We're going to ask the permittee to develop that environmental monitoring plan, and they're going to pick that. I believe in Ocean Aero, though, that we said that they must go a minimum of X distance upstream and a minimum of X distance downstream. So we're not going to pick it. It's not going to be the same for every facility. It's going to be different. And that's based on a number of factors that I'm sure y'all are well aware of.
Thanks, Kip. Has there been any collaboration with FDA regarding approved administration of therapeutics and the resulting discharge?
There is an interagency work group, and we are coordinating with FDA. I have not been involved with that in detail at all, though.
All right, folks. So I'll leave it open for just another minute.
I got my contact here on the screen. Hopefully y'all can still see that. I'd love for anyone to reach out with me to clarify any of the questions that I had, to dive a little bit deeper into any issue or concerns or questions y'all might have.
I punched it in the chat too. So, well, I think with that, Kip, let's go ahead and wrap it up. I really appreciate your time. We had a great discussion today. Yeah, just fantastic webinar. I'll just mention really quickly, for folks that are enjoying the NAA webinars, next month we do have the National Pork Producers Council on, giving some tips and tricks and 101 about lobbying for farmers at the state and federal level. So that should be a pretty interesting one. Look out for that announcement pretty soon. And yeah, we encourage everybody to join the National Aquaculture Association, whether you're a farmer, supplier, or a public servant like Kip is here. We're the big umbrella and the unified voice for the industry, and we really appreciate you supporting what we're doing. And I do see one more question. I'll fire it out there, Randy. And yeah, just reach out to NAA anytime as well. My email's charlie@nationalaquaculture.org. We're here to help and put you in touch with folks as well. So let's finish it off with one more question from Randy. So in comparing notes with your colleagues across the country, do you note many differences in interpretation between regions?
That's a good question. So
Yeah.
I wish I could say that there are no inconsistencies, but there are. We're a large agency. Each region is set up a little bit differently. I can say to the extent possible, to the maximum extent possible, we try to be consistent. But there's going to be some cases that are probably project specific or fact specific that we're going to interpret things a little bit different or apply things a little bit different. So, yeah, I hope that answers that question.
All right. Well, Kip, thanks again for donating your time today. And yeah, we'll see everybody on September 20th for the next webinar. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Thank you.